The core is where most of our running power is generated. Now, if it's used properly and trained properly, it can also be highly resistant to fatigue. So how do we get the most out of our core so that we can generate more speed with less effort? How's it going, runners? My name is Justin Thompson. I'm your Average Running PT, and I help the average runner achieve their own personal elite status. If that's something you guys are into, then go ahead and hit that subscribe button and click the bell so you know when the next video comes out. Now, understanding how to use the core properly is extremely important to runners. One, it can make you resilient to injury, but number two, it can help transfer power from your legs through your body so that you propel yourself much further and much faster with every stride. Now, the core is not just made up of your abdominal muscles, it's made up of the entire thing that wraps around your trunk, but also I include the hips in there as well, because these two things, your core, your trunk, and your hips, they work together to help generate the necessary amount of power to move faster over the ground. Now, there's 3 points that I want to make here. The title says hip drive and stable spine. That's 2 of the points, but there's one really important thing that we have to talk about before we even talk about the core and the hips and what they're actually doing. We need to talk about what's the positioning. What's the positioning of our body so that it puts us at a greater advantage to be able to use our core and our hips more effectively. So when we talk about positioning, of course we're talking about posture. Now when we talk about posture, of course we're talking about, are you in a proper alignment so that you are not losing energy with every single step? So then how do we set our posture correctly, and why is it actually important to have the proper posture when you're running? So if we turn to the side here, what I really want to show you guys is how everything lines up through our spine. So whenever we're running, if we are running in a completely relaxed state, what we're going to end up doing is we're going to end up letting our hips tilt forward and our shoulders and everything's just going to kind of flop straight down, putting an accentuated or increased lumbar curve right here in our lower back. Whenever that curve becomes accentuated, that's not a very stable spine, okay? So first of all, whenever we're getting into that stable spine position, we have to make sure that we are not just letting our hips tilt forward, but we're letting our hips come back so that our spine goes from a giant curve to a much smaller curve. That way your bones are stacked up on top of each other much more effectively so that the forces through them are going through the joints and not just bending over the joints. Okay, so it's really important to get rid of this potential breaking point in your spine here by tilting those hips backwards just a little bit. It doesn't have to be a lot. I'm not talking about 100% maximum contraction. I'm talking 10 to 20%, just kind of gently tilting your hips back. And then what you can also do from there is you can bring your chest just forward just a touch. It's only like a ½ inch to an inch. It's not very much. So I just want to make sure that you're not just sitting way back here, but your chest comes forward, your hips come under, and now your spine is in a nice neutral position so that those forces through it can go through those joints and not break over the joints. Now, if you're having a hard time achieving that position, that could be because your hip flexors are really tight. So if you can't get your hips to rotate backwards and your spine to straighten out a little bit more, then your hip flexors, which come up and attach to your spine, might be pulling your spine into that position. So you really have to make sure that your hip flexors have enough flexibility in them as well. Now, I've made a video before about how stretching is not all that effective for runners, but the hip flexors have to have a certain amount of flexibility, a certain amount of mobility in order for you to be able to express a full hip extension without that breaking point in your spine happening. So I want to make sure that whenever you extend those hips, you're not going to get a big breaking point in your lower back. Now, the second point is you have to have good spinal stability. Now, of course, if you can't hold that position and hold it with good strength, then that spinal stability and that posture is going to start to break down. So of course you can always do things like plank variations and things of that sort. Now, the problem with that is you can't just do the spinal stability and plank variations and things like that without also thinking about what's going on at the hips. So when we talk about hip extension strength and power and effectiveness, are you able to actually extend that hip out the back? Now we're talking about, can you control the spine while extending your hips through their full range of motion? Now, of course, you can work on hip extension with bridges and hip thrusts and just hip extension exercises. But we have to make sure that these two things, the spinal stability and the hip extension, are working together. That's why I can't just take one and show you spine stability exercises and then show you hip extension exercises without talking about them both together. So then the question is, of course, can you maintain a stable spine while the hips are powerfully extending during your running? So let me give you guys a couple of quick tests to help you figure out, do you have good core stability? Do you have good hip extension strength? Do you have good flexibility in your hip flexors? Okay, so this is really important because it's a quick exam that you can figure out, okay, there's where my deficits are. And it's just a simple bridge test. Okay, so what you're going to do is you're going to lay on your back with your knees bent, tuck your feet up under you a little bit so that they're kind of close to your butt. You're going to lift your hands up in the air, and then you're going to lift into a bridge. Okay, now what you have to do is when you get here, you have to assess what's actually working. Is it your hamstrings that are kicking in? Is it your lower back that's kicking in? Or is it your glutes that's generating that upward drive? Okay, now when you get there, you're going to lift up, and you also want to make sure, is my core, is my back staying flat, or am I starting to try and arch my lower back here? Okay, now if you're feeling like you're arching your lower back or your lower back muscles are really overactivated, then we know we need to work on glute strength. Now if you feel like you're getting here and your range of motion is running out, or you feel tightness in the front of your quads or the front of your hips, now we need to work on hip flexor flexibility, right? Now, from here, you can also do it one side to the other as well. So what I would do is put your hands up in the air, kick one leg straight out. And when you lift up in the air, you're going to feel, what's working hard. Is it in the hamstring? Is it in the lower back? Is it in the glutes? But I also want you to assess what's going on in your hips. Are you getting a hip drop on one side? That could kind of show you, if you have some sort of injury, where the weaknesses are one side to the other. And of course you compare to the other side and see what's going on there. Okay? So you're able to see then what's going on with your hip strength, your core stability with hip strength. Okay? So that's what I'm saying. You can't really separate these two things. You have to make sure that you can create that core stability and keep it when you're lifting with your hips, okay? So whenever you're driving yourself forward when you run, can you keep that core stable while generating that hip extension to push you forward? All right, but then you're also on the unilateral ones, you're trying to figure out what kind of strength do you actually have one side to the other? Are there some deficits? Are there things that you can work on to shore up one side compared to the other? Okay, so that's a quick little test for you guys to kind of give you an idea as to whether you have the right amount of flexibility, the right amount of strength, good core stability, and good control. And with the results of this test, you can kind of start to build a little bit of a core and strength training routine for your hips and core that will help you to that will be customized to you so that you can then go on and shore up your specific strengths and weaknesses. All right, so it can be very personalized to you and to what you need. All right, so I might go over some specific exercises for some specific problems in another video. Let me know down in the comments below if that's something that you guys are interested in. If I were to do this test on, say, myself or somebody else, what would be some of those things that I would recommend for that person based on the certain deficits that I might find, right? Just let me know down in the comments if that's something that you guys are interested in. And that's all for today, folks. Head on out there, seek your elite. God bless, and I'll see you next time.